Hello, this is Angelia, and you are listening to or watching the podcast, Why You Do What You Do. The podcast that talks about human development and psychology to maybe help you figure out a little bit more about why you do what you do. And of course, we're talking about our elders here, have been for a little bit. And we were talking about relationships with adult children or their absence of such things. And we're going to pick back up on that. Many elderly people whose adult children are mentally ill, retarded, physically disabled, or stricken with serious illnesses serve as primary caregivers for as long as both parent and child live. And now, that's the case. I know of families who, there's a family down the road who have a mentally disabled child, and now that the parents have passed, the older brother is taking care of things, and, that's just kind of the deal. Oh my gosh, I'm trying not to sneeze. Bless me, Lord. One of our children is mentally disabled, and he's running behind his peers by about 6 years, according to the counselor. And, he wants to live on his own. We are talking about leaving one day and moving away. And he wants to stay here and, inherit this house and live on his own. And so we have said, we think he can do it. He's showing me that he's responsible with bills and everything, and he's got the money. And so we've asked the brothers to kind of keep an eye on things, make sure that, because, people with ADD are not the most clean folks going. They don't pay a lot of attention to hygiene and cleaning and things like that. So we're making sure that somebody's keeping an eye on things, make sure the place doesn't, become infested or anything fall down. There needs to be things in place, because if you have, a child like that, you have to know that when you're gone, they're still going to be looked after. I know when I used to work in a nursing home, we had a guy who was only in his 30s there. His parents were in their 70s. It was a late life pregnancy, and they decided to keep him, and he had mental disability. Well, he ended up in the nursing home in his 30s because his parents just could no longer, he was in a wheelchair and needed help and everything, and they could no longer help him out. And that was the saddest visit every week of the whole week, because you could tell they really wanted him to be with them. They would come, they would spend the whole day, and they would cry. Everybody would cry. They would all just be hugging and cry when they left. And that was the worst, thing to me, is to have to leave your child there because you can't physically take care of them anymore. That had to be just, you could tell it was breaking their hearts. So, if you're in a situation like that, you need to make sure that there's somebody, like my son's mild, he has severe ADD, but that's a mild disability, but it does affect him, but there are people a lot worse off, and if you find yourself in a situation where you're getting older and you have a child that needs, someone to kind of keep an eye out on things. In my husband's family, they have a girl who's severely mentally disabled. She just can't grasp a lot of things. So the mother is now getting older and in her 80s, and so she's made sure that the sisters, she set the girl up with her own house. She has a disability coming into her bank account every month, they're keeping an eye on things, make sure she's not spending too much money so she can pay her bills. All the bills are coming out automatically every month. You need to make sure that these people are going to be taken care of if you are getting older and might leave them behind. Elderly parents tend to be distressed or become depressed if their children have serious problems. For example, with drugs or financial dependency. Parents may consider each problems a sign of their own failure. And like we said the other day, they said this also last time. Sometimes there are bad parents that cause problems, and sometimes it's just the child rebelling and doing their own thing. So again, everyone has their own choices in life, and you're not completely responsible, but, parents know if they were a good parent or not. So, you know, as the saying goes, you can run on for a long time, but, the facts are, if you were good or not. And if you weren't, then apologies can be made, reparations can be done. So, if that was the case, you might want to think about that. Sorry about that, my son came in. I had to pause. And a growing number of grandparents and even great-grandparents, particularly African Americans, raise or help raise their children. And I know some families like that, where they're raising the grandkids. And I know a woman lives, I don't know, I guess 15 minutes away from here. And anyway, she's a great-grandparent, and she's got one of her grandkids and one of her great-grandkids that are staying with her. So, unfortunately, that is a reality. And that's also a concern, because if you're old or getting up there, then what's going to happen to those kids if you go? Now, I've also known families where that was the case, and finally the child got their stuff together and started being responsible for their families. But by this point, that's not always welcome. So, you got to think about these things. So, if you're an elder and there's younger people in your care, you need to think about what happens if I go. You need to make arrangements. You need to have, people who are going to be there for these people. Non-normative caregivers who are pressed into active parenting at a time when such a role is unexpected frequently feel strain. Needless to say, if you're planning on retired and then suddenly, the kid goes AWOL and you end up with a grandkid, that certainly wasn't what you had planned. So, needless to say, that might make you feel strained. This may be even more true of elderly caregivers than of middle-aged ones. Because like I said, middle-aged folks, you're still fairly young. You're still able to do these things. But like I said, when you're older, you're not physically capable of carrying around a kid, and it might become a serious hardship. So, like I say, you do the best you can for everybody, but sometimes you have to do what's best for you. So, these things have to be thought about long and hard. Often ill-prepared physically, emotionally, and financially for the task, they may not know where to turn for help and support. And that's because things change. I know certainly things are different than they were in my parents' day and in my grandparents' day. So, things that they thought were a thing, like I remember, my mom had green stamps and all that stuff. By the time I was an adult, we didn't have that, and she had said something. I was like, they don't have that anymore, Mom. But, that was the thing back in the day. So, you need to get in touch with people, contact your community center or, your center for community-based services, and talk to people and find out what's available and what you can do to help take some of the burden off of you. They worry about who will take over for them when they become sick or die, as well as who will take care of them. Because, if you're an old person and you've got kids you worry about, then these kids might not be grown by the time you're, getting up there to the point where you need someone to help take care of you. So that is something, also to think about, is to have some kind of plan in place so that, kids can be taken care of, you can be taken care of, because stuff happens and life is messy. What about the increasing number of older adults without living children? In 1998, 1 out of 5 women in the United States had no children. And I know there are some in my family who had no children. And I just do wonder, what's going to happen there? How will childlessness affect them as they age? Again, hopefully, they'll reach out to somebody, if they need the help, because, I just hate to think of anybody, ending up like one of those silly commercials where they're laying on the floor for days or whatever. But, without someone there, that could be a reality. Early studies suggested that childless people are no lonelier, no more negative about their lives, and no more afraid of death than those with children. Because everybody, is different, but in that regard, most people are the same. Having a child and not having a child is a personal choice. Everybody's different. I always knew I wanted some. I would have had more, but the conditions didn't work out that way. So, however, some older women who never had children express regrets, and that feeling became more intense the older they got. Like I know folks who didn't have natural children and then got up in their 40s and decided I'm going to adopt, and they adopted, already aged kids, young kids, 5 and up, and filled their house with these folks and enriched their life that way. So if you want something, there's always a way to make it happen. Widows without grown children may lack an important source of solace because, they don't have that person to lean on when their spouse goes. Childless people also may lack a ready source of care and support if they become infirm. Because, like I say, if you have a child, they might be willing to help you. Whereas if you have no one, then you're going to have to seek out care. In Canada, where 5 to 10% of older adults are unmarried and childless, 3/4 of this group report a lack of support, especially emotional support. Because if you don't have anybody, to talk to and bounce things off of, then, you're going to be lonely. Relationships with siblings. When Elizabeth Bessie Delany was 102 and her sister Sarah, Sadie, was 104, they published a best-selling book, Having Our Say, the Delany Sisters' First 100 Years. I think that's pretty cool. The daughters of a freed slave, Bessie overcame racial and gender discrimination to become a dentist, and Sadie a high school teacher. The sisters never married. For 3 decades, they lived together in Mount Vernon, New York. Although their personalities were as different as sugar and spice, the two women were best friends, sharing a sense of fun and the values their parents had instilled in them. And I think that's great. We can be best friends with a sibling. My sister passed away early, but we were getting to be friends, and I'm glad that we had that time together because I was 5 years older than her. So a lot of times she was a kid to me, and I was an older, kid, preteen, teen, and I didn't want to mess with no little kids. But that's how you are when you're in the double digits. But she was catching up. And she was starting to like the music that we were listening to, starting to like the clothes, that we were wearing in my day and everything. And so, she was starting to become my friend. And so it was, very sad to me that she died. I think that's great when siblings can be friends. More than 3 out of 4 Americans aged 60 and older have at least one living sibling. And those in the young old bracket average 2 or 3. I have a living brother and I have a living half-sister. So I have 2. Brothers and sisters play important roles in the support network of older people. Not in some cases. There are people I know that they are very close, brothers and sisters. They talk a lot, hang out a lot, and do things together. And then there are families where that's not a thing. So, like I say, every family's different. So, siblings more than other family members provide companionship, as friends do. But siblings more than friends also provide emotional support. And I always try to do that. It's maybe not always appreciated, but I always try to do it. Conflict and overt rivalry generally decrease by old age. And that's generally, certainly not in every case. And some siblings try to resolve earlier conflicts. And I know folks who've done that. Over the years, they had problems growing up and a lot of rivalry and crap. And then when they got to be, adults, they were like, oh, well, this was all, dumb. And really, a lot of it goes back to parents' attitudes about, the children. It's like someone tried to say something about, sibling rivalry and I was like, I had no rivalry with my sister, Yes, I believe she was favored by my mom. But that was my mom's deal. That wasn't her fault. That wasn't her deal. So, when people say stuff like that, to me, they're like lower than worm poop, down in the ground. Because, it's like, hey, my sister's dead, and you're going to pull her out and try to weaponize her? That's not cool. Worm poop. However, underlying feelings of rivalry may remain, especially between brothers. Because, them guys, sorry guys, but y'all, y'all got that macho thing happening, and, no. So, brothers have more of a problem getting along than sisters do. Most older adult siblings say they stand ready to provide tangible help and would turn to a sibling for such help if needed. And now I used to feel that way, and now there's one of them I say, hey, you know what? This is what you wished. This is what you get. So, but relatively few actually do so, except in emergencies such as illness, when they became caregivers, or the death of a spouse. Usually something like that could bring siblings closer together and be there for each other. Siblings in developing countries are more likely to furnish economic aid. And now here in America, most everybody has their own money or can get help or whatever. So that's not as big a need here as in developing countries. Regardless of how much help they actually give, siblings' readiness to help is a source of comfort and security in late life. And like I say, my one, if they need me, okay, I'm there. And like I say, the other one has decided they don't want to have anything to do with me. So, okay, remember that. That might come back to bite you, but who knows. For people who are unmarried or have only one or two children, or none, relationship with siblings and their children in late life may become increasingly significant. And now I often think about my little sister. I mean, she would have been a great aunt. She would have loved the boys and, doing stuff with the boys. And, I often think, dang, I wish she would have pulled through. But, we have a picture of her on our bookcase in there, and the kids know her. The kids know about her. They've known about her all their life. So, she has a presence here, even when she's not here. The nearer older people live to their siblings, and the more siblings they have, the more likely they are to confide in them. Like I say, that's most families, certainly not all families. Especially if there was dysfunction in the family, that affects everyone. Especially if there was a difference in the way children were treated. One might have this experience, and the other might have this experience. And then there's some cognizant dissonance when the one says, "Hey, no, we were done," and no, like, that's not right. But it's like, well, yeah, because this person was treated this way, but this other person was treated this way. So from their point of view, it's very different from their point of view. So, sometimes the cognizant dissonance can be a barrier to siblings getting close and being there for each other. Reminiscing about shared early experiences becomes more frequent in old age because, as you get older, you remember more stuff from back in the day than you do from 5 minutes ago. That's just a fact that we're all going to have to deal with when we get older. It may help in reviewing a life and putting the significance of family relationships into perspective. Because as we get older, we do that. We review the life. Say, what was this all about? What, have I learned from this? How did this contribute to me being who I am, or whatever? And so it's helpful to have someone to discuss these things with. Not necessary, but helpful. Sometimes it can put family relationship into perspective, because, I know I've had friends who, they would go back and talk to the brother. Well, this happened. Do you remember this happened? Do you remember talking about this? And they were like, oh yeah. Or do you remember this happening? Well, yeah, I kind of do. And so these are important bonds if you have them. Sisters are especially vital in maintaining family relationships and well-being. Perhaps because of women's emotional expressiveness and traditional roles as nurturers. And I'm just going to say, the oldest sister usually becomes the historian of the family. And that's, there's been studies on that, is that women in general remember more than men. Because we have 3 times connection of corpus callosum, and our logical and our emotional side talks to each other, and so we're about 3 times faster than the guys. And if any of you married folks, married women out there listening, you know that you remember a lot more than they do. If any of you guys ever got in trouble for forgetting an anniversary or anything, or my husband talked one time. We were dealing with his mom, and she started throwing out something from 40 years ago. And he's like, that's 40 years ago. Why are you worried about that now? And I told him, I said, because she remembers it. Women's memories are a lot better than men's. Men's tend to forget a lot of things. And, I can only assume that's because of the way their brain is wired. But women remember more. So, a lot of times, I know in one part of my family that there's an older sister, and they usually defer to her and say, what was this about? What was that about? And so, the oldest sister usually becomes the family historian for the younger folks. And of course, women are more emotionally expressive. Men are not a fan of this, but that's the facts of life. We're in touch with our emotions, and like I say, our logical side and our emotional side talk to each other 3 times more and faster than you guys. Sorry, guys. But that's just a fact of life. So, you can't shut that down. It's our nature. And again, women are the nurturers. We like to take care of people, and we do take care of people. And that's certainly not every woman, but that's in general how women are wired. Older people who are close to their sisters feel better about life and worry less about aging than those without sisters or without close ties to them. And again, that's because, the emotional support is there. And, like I said, that left a pretty good hole in my life when I lost my sister, because I was just sure that she wasn't going to pass away. That God was going to pull out a Hail Mary and save her at the last minute, a miracle. But he didn't do that, and I didn't talk to him for quite some time after that because I didn't like that. But I do feel the void. Like I said, she would have been a great aunt to my kids. She would have loved them. They would have loved her. One of my uncles had gotten her into music that he liked, and he also got one of my sons into some music that he liked, and the other two were just like me. But I think those two would have especially bonded. So that's a shame. Among a national sample of bereaved adults in the Netherlands, those coping with the death of a sister experienced more difficulty than those who had lost a spouse or a parent. And like I say, that's because you come up together in the same house. And like I say, sometimes if, the parents are not super nurturing, usually there's a sister who is. In my own home growing up, and my mom, at a certain point, we had babysitters during the day for a couple of years. And then it was decided I was old enough to kind of watch the kids while she slept during the day because she worked nights. So after school, it was my job to go upstairs, get my little sister out of her baby bed. If a diaper needed to be changed, that was my job too. And, at the time she was still taking formula, or, I think back then they didn't even call it, they called it pablum or something, I don't know. But anyway, sometimes I had to do bottles. Sometimes eventually I was doing sippy cups. And I got the snacks out for them. We had the snacks. I would give them a vitamin, get up in the cabinet and give them a vitamin for the day. We had Flintstones chewables. But, and to keep them entertained and quiet as best I could. Because if we got too loud, who was going to get it? Yeah. Because I was the oldest and I knew better. But, little kids get loud and, so it was not an ideal situation. But I definitely had to step in and be a nurturer at the ripe old age of 7 and 8 years old. So, you shouldn't be doing that to your kids. Your kids shouldn't be parenting. You're the parent. That's your job. And if you can't do the job, then you should continue to find someone who can help you do that job. In a lot of cultures, the older kids do take care of the younger kids, but that's not an ideal situation. That's how, kids can get hurt doing stupid stuff, because kids are going to do stupid stuff, let's face it. I remember one time we caught a garbage can on fire. So, kids are going to do stupid stuff. Don't put your child in charge of other children. That's not a good thing. They are not mature enough for that. That is going to cause them stress, because they feel like they have to be responsible, not only for themselves and their child, but for these other people as a child. It is not a good, safe thing to be doing. So, if you are a single mom and you have the kids, go ahead and send them to a babysitter, a neighbor or something. Figure something out. So that you don't put your children in that situation where something bad can happen, The death of a sibling in old age may be understood as a normative part of that stage of life. But still, survivors may grieve intensely and become lonely or depressed. Like I said, my sister passed away, I was 17, but I still feel that loss. Because, like I said, she was just now getting ready to be a teenager. She was, like I said, starting to like the things I liked and everything. There's a line in a movie where it said, "You were just now becoming interesting," I think, as Indiana Jones, I don't know. But like I said, that's kind of how I felt like her. She was just now, becoming somebody that I could relate to, because there was that age difference there. The loss of a sibling represents not only a loss of someone to lean on and a shift in the family constellation, but perhaps even a partial loss of identity. And I know people like that. I have some friends like that. I know some other people like that, family, who moved away. And they had their own life, and, that's great. But then when they would come back, to visit or whatever, things were different, and the people who stayed in that location, came up more with these people, and they know what's been going on and everything. And, sometimes there can be some problems when people disagree with how things were. But generally the one on the ground is usually right. So, because they didn't go off and develop a whole new, life that maybe, has led them to not really pay attention to what happened in the old life. and therefore they've forgotten. I knew one man who forgot what his sister, he had a sister that passed away. He forgot what she looked like. He had to ask family members to send him pictures because he didn't remember what she looked like. So that's how removed he was from his past life. So, I mean, that's pretty bad. To mourn for a sibling is to mourn for the lost completeness of the original family within, which one came to know oneself. And certainly that's your incubator. The family you grew up in, that's your incubator. The first relationship you have is with your mother. If that was not a good relationship, then you're going to have problems with relationships later on. And then the extended family, and on and on and out. So, again, if you didn't come up in a good family, if it was dysfunctional, you can overcome that. You can be your own best parent. Go find a counselor or therapist who does inner child work, and certainly do that for yourself, so that you can, get over the things that happen to you, and you can know how to take care of yourself. Because, like I said, in mine, I was not allowed to have any self-esteem. That was not allowed. So, I didn't have any for the longest time. And, I had the, imposter syndrome because, like, at school and with teachers and other people out and bosses and people in the community and everything, just, oh, you're so, you're so good, you're so smart, you're so pretty, you're so nice, but that's not what I was told at home. So there was some cognizant dissonance there, and I felt like, well, maybe I am this bad person that these people have told me I was all these years, and maybe these people just are wrong. They're seeing things in me, that because of things I'm doing, and maybe they are wrong. But then I talked to a therapist who said, maybe they're right. Maybe they're actually seeing you. Maybe they're actually getting to know you. Whereas this people here did not ever bother to get to know you. They labeled you because that's how codependency works sometimes. They said you're this, and that's where they left it. They didn't bother to get to know you. They didn't want to know anything about you because you were this. So, this also happens in families. So family dynamics can be a difficult thing. But like I say, if you've had that be a problem in your life, certainly go and talk to somebody, get it hashed out, so that you can have your older years be happy years. It also can bring home one's own nearness to death. Because, if sisters and brothers start dying, you're probably on that list next. The generation before me has had a couple pass away, so now the other ones who are left are kind of like, so it's going to happen to all of us. The facts are, if you were born, you're going to die. So, there's a meme that says, don't take life too seriously because nobody gets out alive anyway. And that's unfortunately the truth. Relationships with your children can be a blessing. You don't necessarily have to have that in your life. Relationships with your siblings can be a blessing, but you don't necessarily have to have that in your life. And the more well-adjusted you are, the better you are going to be able to handle not having such things. So, that's where I'm going to leave you for today. I hope that helped you figure out more about why you do what you do. Please like and share this educational program so we can spread it around the world. If you want to help me out, subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you want to help me out even more, go to my Patreon page and become a patron. Thanks for watching or listening. That's all for now. Until next time.